Deadlocked on a deal. President Trump not wavering from his Truth Social post that a memorandum of understanding will be signed today to stop the fighting, open the Strait of Hormuz, and halt Iran's nuclear program.
However, Iran's regime reportedly denies anything will be signed today. And in a Telegram post, the country's foreign ministry spokesperson suggested the president is using this as a publicity stunt because it's his 80th birthday. So former executive director for Iranian Americans for Liberty, Bryan Leib, is with us, and Iranian-born human rights activist Goldie Ghamari is also here too. Appreciate your joining us this Sunday morning. A lot to discuss. Bryan, starting with you here, mediators from Qatar are in Iran right now to finalize this agreement, and critics argue that it lacks teeth. So break down how this MOU is different than a deal that could potentially be signed. How do you see it?
Well, good morning to both of you. And a lot of us are flying in the dark when it comes to what this MOU potentially is going to look like. We've seen a lot of reports, I think, from really all sides about what potential points are going to be in this deal. But it is very important to emphasize that this is not an actual, like, full-blown deal. This is an MOU potentially paving the way for a deal to happen. But I don't think it's going to come as any surprise to you guys. I mean, I don't think ultimately there will be any kind of a deal here. We're dealing with a regime that really is not interested in doing a deal. They just want to breathe a couple more days, have some more oxygen to keep going. And from my perspective, an MOU is giving them just that. It's giving them more time and keeping them alive. So we'll see what happens here. We'll see if an MOU gets signed today. We'll be closely monitoring it.
Goldie, let me ask you, President Trump is crediting the current regime leaders for helping orchestrate the agreement. Now, of course, they're pushing back, but I want you to hear this first.
I really believe it's a regime change because I find these people to be much more rational than the people that are no longer with us.
So, Goldie, the question is, do you agree with that statement that, and who are we actually negotiating with? We've been having this conversation on Newsmax for a while now, that, you know, with the fractionalization, with the Revolutionary Guard, who is the deal with? And are you confident that the Iranian people are going to get a situation where they have a regime that is not going to torture and kill them?
So, you know, a couple weeks ago, Scott Bessent, when he was filling in for Caroline Levitt, he clarified that when President Trump is talking about regime change, he means a change within the regime and of the leadership. So it's not an actual revolution, which is a completely different scenario. President Trump is dealing with IRGC, the foreign affairs minister, and Ghalibaf, the speaker of parliament. What's really interesting is that right now, given the fact that President Trump is portraying IRGC and Ghalibaf as, you know, wanting to come to terms, come to some sort of deal with the United States, the supporters of the Islamic regime are now actually calling for the death of IRGC and Ghalibaf. That's how much internal division this is causing. What I believe is President Trump has essentially put the Islamic regime in a checkmate situation. If they agree to the deal that President Trump wants, that's essentially surrendering to you know, the killers of their beloved supreme dictator, Khamenei. If they don't sign the deal, then President Trump has made it very clear that he's going to continue with the military escalation. Either way, the way I see it, the Islamic regime is going to be weakened to a point that the Iranian people will be able to rise up, overthrow them, and reclaim the country.
So many great points there, and that's ultimately the goal, what we set out to do, to empower the Iranian people. President Trump has talked about that numerous times. There are, though, multiple reports saying the IRGC is actively closing off their entrances to their uranium supply and even mining them. Bryan, this sounds like the same playbook Iran used to mine the Strait of Hormuz, and the question here is still this: is the reward worth the risk if we send military might out there to get the uranium?
Well, listen, that's a great question, and it's such a good point because not enough over the last couple of weeks has really been talked about with the IRGC. I mean, there's figureheads that are part of, you know, the regime that are negotiating with us, but it's my belief that the IRGC is still pulling all the strings. That's why you're seeing, you know, things like a one-way suicide drone going into a U.S. Army Apache helicopter trying to bring that down, and 4 more, you know, one-way suicide drones that went out a couple days ago. So, I mean, the IRGC is still very much in control. They still very much have the infrastructure, believe it or not. I mean, even after, us with our ally Israel have killed so many layers of their leadership, they're still there. They're still alive and kicking, and they still have the resources to send their ICBMs into the Gulf states, potentially into Israel, and to still wage this terrorism throughout the region. So I think whatever happens with this MOU, whatever happens with any kind of potential deal, we really have to be focused on how do we get rid of the IRGC, because they are the ones that, in my opinion, remain in control at this time.
Mm-hmm. Goldie, I want to ask you that question, actually. How do we get rid of the IRGC? In other words, how is it possible for the Iranian people to rise up? And we've talked about the torture and the killings over 47 years, a country of 90 million people enslaved, tortured, killed. How do they rise up? Is this something that we should be talking about, providing small arms, providing support for the people to be that balance on the ground?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. In fact, we're starting to see a campaign coming out of occupied Iran where Iranians are sending messages saying, arm us, help us overthrow this Islamic regime. Ultimately, the way to look at the Islamic regime, and especially the IRGC, they're the modern day version of the Nazis. They're essentially Muslim Nazis. And, how did we get rid of the Nazis in World War II? We basically used military strikes and bombed them out of existence. And that's the only way that we can get rid of the IRGC, because the Islamic regime views victory different than rational, logical actors. For the Islamic regime, victory means survival. So if they are able to survive the situation right now, that means in their minds they are victorious, and then they can, down the road become strong again and continue once again to export their Islamic revolution, their jihad around the world. So, the best way to end this, and the best way to not just make the world a better and safer place, but to help the Iranian people, is to arm them. But also, I believe, is to continue with the economic campaign as well as the military campaign against the Islamic regime, weaken them to a point where they cannot fight back, and then the Iranian people will finally have a chance to rise up.
Okay, Goldie, Ghamari, Bryan Leib, thank you both very much for the conversation.
Thank you both.
Thanks, guys.